My name is Martin, and truth be told, I was already halfway out of my marriage long before it officially unraveled. For months, maybe longer, I'd been living in something that barely resembled a partnership. It wasn't explosive or dramatic, just a slow drift apart, like watching paint fade. But the moment I knew it was over was during a family barbecue, when they laughed at me. That night, once the guests had gone and the house fell silent, I walked out. Julie and I had been married for just over 8 years. In the beginning, we had a connection most couples dream about. We weren't just chasing stability. We were building something meaningful. A real home, not just a roof over our heads. That was the future we pictured. And for a while, we chased it side by side. But by our 5th year, things started shifting, quietly, gradually. So subtly that we barely noticed until the distance had already set in. The real strain began when we started trying for children. We both wanted them, desperately. But as the months dragged into years, we faced nothing but disappointment. Tests, appointments, hormones, schedules. Our lives became a revolving door of hope and heartbreak. I watched the pain change Julie. At first, I thought it was just emotional fatigue. We were both struggling. But slowly, she began to withdraw. Not just from the treatments, but from me. She stopped fighting for the dream. It was like she'd surrendered to the heartbreak, and along with it, let go of our relationship. The warmth between us faded. What was once effortless closeness turned into strained civility. We shared a house, a bed, a dinner table. But I felt like I was living with someone I barely knew. And the silence between us? It grew louder by the day. What cut the deepest was how unfazed she seemed. She had gone emotionally numb. And I kept telling myself that staying was love. That love meant holding on, even if she had already let go. Then came the final stretch. Over a year before our marriage collapsed, Julie's sister showed up on our doorstep in crisis. Her own marriage had imploded in chaos, screaming matches, infidelity, even police intervention. She was a wreck and needed a place to land. Julie asked if her sister and 2 young kids could stay for a bit. Just a few days, she said. I agreed. It was the kind thing to do. The children didn't choose any of this. They arrived with a couple of bags and a promise it was temporary. But days turned to weeks, then months. The guest room overflowed with her sister's belongings. The kids' toys invaded every corner. Kitchen, living room, even our bedroom. Our laundry loads grew heavier, now mixed with theirs. Still, I stayed quiet. But when weeks stretched into the 3rd month, I felt like a stranger in my own home. It was chaos. Her sister had no filter. Loud, crude, and constantly crossing boundaries. The kids were wild, undisciplined. Our house felt more like a noisy daycare than a home. Every evening I'd come home exhausted, only to walk into new conflict. And Julie? She always defended her sister. No matter how inappropriate her sister's behavior was, Julie took her side. If I calmly voiced my concerns, I was met with cold dismissal. She's my sister, she'd say. What do you expect me to do? Throw her out over something petty? It didn't matter how I felt. To her, I was the problem for even bringing it up. One moment still burns in my memory. Her sister cracked a joke at my expense, mean-spirited and cutting. Instead of shutting it down, Julie laughed and said, "Oh, don't mind him. He's just sensitive." And then they both laughed. At me. I felt small. Eventually, I wasn't even sleeping in our own room anymore. Julie gave it up to her sister and the kids. I'd find a couch or spare blanket and make do. That's when I knew, deep down, I was no longer part of the equation. And that's when I left. I know some folks might hear this and wonder, why didn't you just leave sooner? Believe me, I asked myself that question more times than I can count. But it wasn't that simple. A big part of what Julie was going through was the heartbreak of not being able to have children. It crushed her spirit, and I held on to the hope that if we could survive that pain, if we could somehow rebuild together, the love we once shared might find its way back. So, I stayed longer than I probably should have, convinced there was still a chance for us. But deep down, I was wearing thin. One day, I hit a breaking point where love alone couldn't keep me anchored in a home where I felt like a stranger. I scheduled a quiet meeting with a divorce attorney. I laid out the facts. A few weeks later, the paperwork was ready, but I couldn't bring myself to hand it over. Not because I expected her to change, but because a small part of me still longed for her to see me like she used to. Just one more time. As I waited, the tension only grew. I started making a list in my head, ticking off everything I'd need to do. First, I packed some essentials, clothes, papers, sentimental things, and boxed them up without drawing attention. Then, I rented a storage unit out of town and paid cash, somewhere no one would think to look. I moved the boxes there slowly, a few at a time. I opened a new bank account under a slight variation of my name, bought a new phone, even picked a new city, a quieter place, far from here. Every detail was planned, down to the hour. If this marriage ended, I was ready to vanish. But I still didn't act, because despite all the pain, I still loved her. Beneath the hurt and exhaustion, I was still holding on to the woman I once married. Then one Saturday, I took a few hours to clear my head. When I pulled back into the driveway, there were more cars than usual lining the street. Laughter spilled from the backyard, kids shouting and running around before I even opened the door. I stepped inside and followed the noise. The backyard was alive with a full family barbecue. Kids darted around with juice boxes. Someone manned the grill. Music played softly. People chatted, laughed. Plates piled with food and drinks scattered on the patio table. The problem? I had no idea this was happening. I stood at the door, feeling like I'd wandered into someone else's party in my own home. I kept my face neutral. I spotted Julie, laughing with her parents near the table. Before I could say anything, one of her aunts waved me over. "Martin, come help me with this," she called. I nodded, forcing a smile. I got along with most of her family better than I did with Julie these days. So, I went over to help. As I handed off a tray, a relative leaned in with a curious grin. "Hey, where have you been all day? We've been here for hours. Didn't you know we were coming?" And in that moment it hit me. I was left out. Before I could answer, my sister-in-law cut in, loud enough for all to hear. "You know, if Martin disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice." Laughter erupted around the yard. Her sister added, "I didn't even realize he wasn't here." They meant it as a joke, but to me it stung. I raised my hot dog like a glass of wine, gave a half-smile, and said, "Challenge accepted." No one said another word. A few glanced at me, probably thinking I was joking, but I wasn't. That night, I decided I was done being invisible in my own life. When the barbecue finally wound down and guests left, the house still hummed softly. That was the night I had already planned to leave Julie. After what was said, I wasn't waiting for it to get worse. I packed the bare essentials, a few clothes, laptop, important documents, and cash in a duffel bag. Before I walked out, I left a copy of the signed divorce papers on the kitchen counter, right in the center where she'd find it in the morning, topped with a yellow sticky note. It said, "You noticed yet?" Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, got in my car, and drove off. That night, I erased every trace of myself online. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all gone. Then I pulled out an old prepaid phone, swapped the SIM card, and dropped the original into a storm drain at a gas station 2 towns over. I didn't want to be found. Not by her, Not by anyone, because staying was starting to feel like self-destruction. I drove to a small cabin I'd bookmarked months earlier, something I found on a quiet classified site. It was owned by a retired guy who didn't ask too many questions. I paid him cash, 3 months up front. No lease, no records, just peace. It sat deep in the woods, forgotten by the world, but close enough to town if I needed groceries. I survived by picking up small freelance jobs online. Nothing fancy, just enough for food, power, and the few comforts I allowed myself. Time blurred. Days bled into each other without schedules, demands, or anyone expecting anything from me. I woke to birds instead of arguments. Weeks passed. My beard grew out. I started eating better, sleeping deeply, and thinking clearly again. Not once did I check on Julie, because I finally understood. That chapter was closed. And nothing good ever comes from reopening a wound just to see if it still bleeds. 8 months in, I logged into an old email account, just to grab a backup file I needed. I wasn't expecting anything, but when the inbox loaded, I froze. Dozens of unread emails, all from Julie. At first, I hovered over the delete button. I didn't want to go there, but something in me clicked, and I started reading. The early ones were filled with rage. She called me selfish, a coward, accused me of abandonment, said I had no right to vanish, threatened court. Her words were fire. But as the emails went on, something changed. The tone shifted, the rage dulled, the questions softened. It was like she was hearing her own voice echo back, and not liking what she heard. Then came the recent ones. She said the bank was sending foreclosure warnings, that she was working 2 jobs just to keep the house, that her sister and the kids were gone, because in her words, they weren't helping. She was finally seeing what I tried to explain for years. In one message, she wrote, "I get it now. I understand why you were so distant. I just wish I hadn't been so blind." Another said, "I wish you'd come home, not because I need help, but because I miss you, because I finally understand what you gave up trying to hold everything together." But the one that hit hardest? "I was stupid. I took you for granted. I thought you'd always be around, no matter how much I ignored you. I still haven't signed the divorce papers. I keep hoping one day you'll walk through the door." I won't lie. My chest ached reading that, because I knew that version of her, the version that could love fiercely, the one who once wanted to build a life with me. But sometimes love isn't enough. I spent years in that house trying to believe it could be. But now, after a year off the grid, after breathing for the first time in a long time, I didn't know if I could ever go back. I only went into town once every couple of weeks. That day, I stopped at a small coffee shop I'd come to like. While I waited for my order, I heard someone say my name. At first, I ignored it, but then louder, more certain, again. "Martin?" I turned. It was Ryan, a mutual friend. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. I guess, in a way, he had. We made small talk. I kept it vague. Didn't give away much. Less than a week later, someone knocked on my cabin door. I peeked through the curtain. Julie. She stood there, uncertain, eyes full. I opened the door slowly. Flat expression. No anger. No warmth. "What do you want?" I asked. She didn't speak. She just broke down, sobbing, apologizing, saying she didn't realize it had gotten so bad, that she wished she'd listened, that she finally saw me. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. When she was done, I stepped outside and looked her straight in the eyes. "I'll come back," I said, "but only to end this the right way. I'll sign whatever needs signing. We'll close this chapter like adults. But I can't be your husband again." Not after everything. Not after what your sister did. Not after you let it happen. She didn't argue. Just nodded slowly. Wiped her face. Tried to smile. Couldn't. Then she left. You know, it's strange how people only see the value of something, or someone, after it's gone. That's one of life's hardest truths. And it's a lesson I had to give, and also live through. For years, I stayed in a broken marriage thinking love would be enough to heal it. But love can't survive when one person is fighting, and the other's already checked out. I endured the silence, the disrespect, the chaos. I became invisible in my own home. And yet, it only clicked for her after I disappeared. That's when she realized what I'd been trying to say all along. Sometimes, the only way people hear you is through your absence. So if you're in a place where your presence feels invisible, where you're constantly sacrificing yourself to be understood, don't wait until you're broken just to prove you were whole. And if you're someone pushing someone away, ask yourself, why does it take their silence for you to hear what they've been saying all along? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Share your story. Whether you've lived something like this, or just have something to say. And if you know someone who might need this message today, pass it on. Because you never know who's already packed their bags, who's just waiting for one more reason to disappear. Thanks for listening.